So just a review of what we've learned this week. This is a really important table that you need to learn in your textbooks. It's a great summary of the last couple of weeks that we've done. So if you just want to review that, maybe write it into your workbooks, practice the parents, the genotypes, the phenotypes, the gametes, and the key terms. This is a great table. So this is the sex-linked crosses and pedigree review. So sex-linked traits, there's things like colour blindness, haemophilia, the muscular dystrophy, and the male patterns baldness. There are a few ones that they will test for if they're going to use examples. The really important term in the sex-linked crosses is hemizygous. So only a single copy of a gene instead of the customary 2 copies. So all of the genes on the X chromosome in the male are hemizygous because they only have a single copy of the X chromosome. So this is an example of the cross. So obviously here you can see that the male has a Y and one X, so therefore he will 100% express that trait because he is hemizygous. For the female, she can be heterozygous, as you can see here, or homozygous, as seen here. So therefore, a woman can be a carrier for an X-linked trait, whereas a male can't because they're only hemizygous. So using the example of haemophilia from the other day, we've seen that the father here has haemophilia, so therefore he's recessive, and the female in this example is not a carrier, so she is homozygous dominant for that trait. So looking down at the F1 generation here, F1, you've got the son without haemophilia because he has got the X from his mother, and regardless of which X he gets, neither one will have the haemophilia gene on it. And then the female daughter here will get an X from the mother and an X from the father, therefore she will be a carrier for haemophilia. The son will again get the X from the mother, so won't be affected, and the daughter once again an X from the mother and an X from the father, so she will also be a carrier because haemophilia is X-linked recessive. So we're now looking at pedigrees. So this is the key of what a pedigree has. So males will be square, females circle, and affected is always shaded, as seen here. Occasionally you will see carriers with half coloured in. That means it's a carrier, but quite often they won't show the carriers. You've got to find that out for yourself. So this female here could be a carrier, but they just don't show you half coloured in. So that's up to you to figure out. When they're married, they have a line across, and then it's always important to put the Roman numerals on the generation. So you've got first generation and second generation. You've got identical twins and non-identical twins. When you're looking at a pedigree, also don't be surprised if you have inbreeding with a line between brothers or cousins. That's quite often possible in an exam question. So when we're looking at a pedigree, there's 3 steps that you need to look for. Try to establish if the mode of inheritance is dominant or recessive. So if 2 parents have the trait and a child doesn't have the trait, it's dominant. If 2 parents don't have the trait but a child has the trait, then it's recessive. If that doesn't work it out, then we eliminate, where possible, the X-linked traits. So that's if a male is affected, then all his mothers and all of his daughters will be affected. That's X-linked dominance. So X-linked dominance, you always look for affected males. And then if you look for X-linked recessive, you look for affected females. So if a female is affected, then her father and all of her sons must be affected. So if you look at these traits and one of these components contradicts, then you can rule out this as an inheritance. So with your X-linked recessive, then the trait is most common in males in a large pedigree. if it's most common in females, it's most likely X-linked dominant. So if none of these aspects contradict and there's more females, then it's most likely X-linked dominant. If there's more males and it follows the rules for sex-linked, it's most likely recessive. Because with its recessive, a female, when she's heterozygote, can just be a carrier. The male will always express it because he's hemizygous. Finally, if neither rule applies, it's most likely autosomal if it's equally shared between females and males. Obviously, this isn't 100%, we can't see their genotypes, but we always say most likely mode of inheritance. So just looking at the haemophilia we looked at before, this is the pedigree that would come from these two parents and these 4 offspring. So if we look at the pedigree, we've got a father that's affected, so he is shaded here. We've got the female who is unaffected here. We then have a son, a daughter, a son, and a daughter. So even though these daughters are carriers, we haven't shown it. We can just assume that they are carriers, knowing that they get an X from the mother and an X from the father. They won't show the trait as haemophilia is X-linked recessive, so it's masked by the mother's dominant genotype here. So she will have the 2 XHs with capitals. So these 2 will be carriers for haemophilia, but they won't show the trait. So we're looking at colour blindness now. This is also an X-linked recessive. So X-linked recessive. And we can assume by looking at this pedigree that the male here is X, big B, Y, which is over here, just here. So I've just drawn it out for you so it's a bit more clear. His wife, because they are married, must be heterozygous for the trait, as their offspring, male, is affected and is colorblind because he has the recessive trait. Now for the 2 daughters, there's 2 options for their genotype. We can't be 100% sure from looking at the pedigree whether they're homozygote, so homozygote, or heterozygote for the trait. So these should be 2 big B's, or heterozygote. So they could both be homozygote dominant or they could both be heterozygote. We're not 100% sure without a further generation in your pedigree. So just introducing you to our new topic for this week, it's dihybrid crosses. So we were looking at monohybrid crosses, which is 1 trait. We're now looking at 2 traits in which both traits have 2 alternative forms. So this is dihybrid, 2 crosses. So in reality, it's just 2 monohybrid crosses considered together. So as you can see here, we've got the R and the Y, and the R and the Y here. And so when we're doing independent assortment, we're assuming that this can produce 4 different types of gametes, as seen here. So you can have your 2 recessive together, which is the first one. You can have your 2 dominants, and then you can have a mix of heterozygotes. So 1 dominant, 1 recessive trait. Same on this side. And then you cross them like you normally do. So these ones go down, and these ones go across. But instead of just having the color, you've also got, say, your shape. So instead of having, just having green or yellow, you also have bumpy or smooth, for example. So here you will have a smooth yellow pea. Here you will have a bumpy green pea. Here you have a bumpy yellow pea. And here you have a smooth green pea. So as you can see, Instead of just having one trait, you've got two that you're considering, but the same technique is used. Perfect. So that's just a short introduction. We'll be going through that on Monday. Just a reminder to do your biosome pages, and have a nice weekend.